just a thing, right? And the factuality of such a fact is what we shall call Dasein's facticity. All right, so being in leads us to this new word. The word is facticity. It's an important word. Anybody take a guess at what facticity means? Yeah, there's some truth in it. I'm going to read this sentence again to you. Whenever Dasein is, it is as a fact. What does that mean? It is what it is. It is that it is. It is as it is.
It's not untrue.
It is as a fact. Okay, if you had to describe yourself as a fact, how would you go about doing it?
It's like authentic.
As a fact. Here. Yeah, right? As something that is present at hand. And that's not all, right? Wherever Dasein is, it is a thing that's taking up space, a fact. Right there, right? In some ways, like this marker is a fact. It's just a brute object. There it is, right? And it has shape and size and weight and color, and it's a fact, right? But the difference between Dasein being a fact and this marker being a fact is Dasein experiences its fact as a fact. It's facticity. That is, it knows itself as being a fact where it is. Experiences itself as a fact where it is. Facticity is this, the factuality of your being a matter of fact. Fact. Facticity. Okay, we're going to just continue reading this because he's going to explain facticity a little bit better. This is a definite way of being. It's not a possible way of being. It is a definite way of being. Now, Dasein is, in its experience of itself, in its existentiality, it is a possibility, always caught up in its own possibilities. But its facticity is that possibility in the real world with real things as a fact. Right? No matter what you think you are still factually what you are. Right? Like I could say to myself, I am the best basketball player in the world. But as a matter of fact, I suck. Doesn't matter how much I think it. So when I suck on the basketball court and I'm thinking I'm the best basketball player in the world, then my experience of my being on the court is pretty weird. Because I'm dealing with the fact with my own version of the facts, right? And I'm delusional. You say, you're crazy, right? Or something like that. And if I'm just shooting free throws and I'm imagining it's like the last shot of the game and I totally brick it and I miss, then I might exclaim, and he was fouled, right? And I get to shoot again because I'm the best player in the world. All right, so facticity is a definite way of being. Does it mean you always get it right? Do you always know what you are in fact? No. You can get it wrong all the time. In fact, you probably never get it right. Exactly. You probably never see yourself, for instance, as other people see you. Because you always see yourself as you seeing yourself, right? But facticity is a definite way of being, and it has a complicated structure which cannot even be grasped as a problem until Dasein's basic existential states have been worked out. In other words, facticity is something we're going to deal with later. We're going to do some other stuff first, but he's going to give you anyways some of the nice juice right up front. The concept of facticity implies that an entity within the world has being in the world in such a way, and all that means is Dasein is in the world in a really weird way. And this is that way. It can understand itself as bound up in its destiny with the being of those entities which it encounters within its own world. That's the important statement. Facticity is this. Dasein is in the space that it's in, and it sees what it's sharing the space with, and it knows that all that other stuff has something to do with what I'm going to be and what my future is going to unfold as. And here's a simple example of that. If I were suddenly to reach into my back waistband here and pull out a semi-automatic pistol, it's a terrible example nowadays because these things happen, right? Now there's something in the world that you didn't know was there, and now you know that it's there. Would it change the way you're being in this classroom right now? Dramatically, right? Because you would know your future has a lot to do with what you're sitting here in the world with. Crazy dude with a gun, right? Do you think this marker changes its way of being in this classroom if I pull out? No, because it is only present at hand, right? Facticity means in your being present at hand, you see that there are other things that are present at hand. But your experience of all these things that are present at hand, you interpret, you understand as having to do with your future you. Your being you is wrapped up in the stuff around you. And it's not the imaginary stuff around you, it's the factical stuff around you.
Can you give the Dasein definition?
The Dasein definition of facticity?
No, said
Yeah.
facticity, you said Dasein is in his space, but I missed
Yep.
that.
That Dasein, in the space that Dasein is in, right, sees its destiny as wrapped up with all the other things that are in its space. Or the way that Heidegger says it is, the concept of facticity implies that an entity within the world has being in the world in such a way. All that is saying is facticity implies that Dasein does this. It can understand itself as bound up in its destiny with the being of those entities which it encounters within its own world. Right? It can understand itself. So I'm going to put this in Dasein, my own terms, right? I understand myself. What I can be is wrapped up with, or determined, or in large part dependent on, or interdependent on, the things that are here with me. For instance, can I be a piano player right now? No, why not? There's no piano, right? So if you were to come in, if someone were to come in here and say, I will give you $1 million if you can play the piano, I would be like, oh, maybe I could pull one up on the computer, right? I'd be desperate to find, like if someone were genuinely going to give me $1 million. Why? Because $1 million has a lot to do with what I see myself as being in the future. The potential me I could be with $1 million, right? It's huge, different than what it is at present. And that future me depends on there being a piano here with me, right? So what I can be is totally dependent on, interdependent on the things in the world here with me in my world. Does that make sense? That's facticity. Facticity is you are in some space, and that space is filled up with stuff. And what you are and what you can be is shaped by that stuff. and what you can make of it. Right? If somebody came in here with a gun, all of these things would no longer be desks. They would be things to hide behind, things to throw at, things to throw at the guy, right? Or defend ourselves, or I don't know what, right? The window would now be like a barrier, and we would wish we could just get rid of it because we'd be trying to run away, right? Other people would become shields, right? Not just fellow students. Our destiny is wrapped up in the stuff that's around us, right? That's all that it's telling us. All right, yeah, here's where he talks about the spirit and the body. So we're just going to continue reading. Facticity is actually very important. So in the first instance, it is enough to see the ontological difference. So we're going to get into facticity more, but right now just know that there is an ontological difference between being in as existentiale and the category of the insidedness which things present at hand can have with regard to one another. Do you guys at least get that? The difference between Dasein being in and a marker being in the classroom. Huge difference, right? All the details of that difference we're going to flesh out, but for right now, Heidegger's telling you, in the first case, in the first instance, it's just good enough for you to know that there is an ontological difference here. That ontological difference is one in the way of our understanding being, right? It's a totally different thing to be in existentially and to be in presence at handedly, right? Being in present at handedly is one thing. Being in existentially, completely different kind of being in, right? If I had started class today saying something like that, you all would have been like, what are you talking about, right? But now, it makes perfect sense. This is progress, right? By thus delimiting being in, we are not denying every kind of spatiality to Dasein. That is, on the contrary, Dasein itself has a being in space of its own. That is, we're not saying that Dasein is only the experience and doesn't have an actual body, right? It's not completely the opposite of this marker. It's just different. But in that difference, it's still got a real fact to it, right? We're not just some, as he says it here, but this in turn is possible only on the basis of being in the world in general. Hence, being in is not to be explained ontologically by some ontical characterization, as if one were to say, for instance, that being in a world is a spiritual property and that man's spatiality is a result of his bodily nature. So it's not that we are a spirit inside of a body, and our body gives us our spatial, we're here as a physical thing, and our spirit gives us our experience of it. That isn't the way this works, is what Heidegger is saying. You are not a mind inside of a body. You are not a spirit inside of a body for him. That is not at all the case. So you can't understand your existence as a spiritual capacity and then your fact as a body problem, right? That's not how being in happens for Dasein. I want to see, so the last sentence of that paragraph that goes over to page 83, he calls this, the idea that we are a spirit inside of a body is a naive supposition, right? This, another way to say that, and he's being nice about it, is this is just stupid talk. There is no spirit inside of a body going on here, is what he's saying. So then you say, okay, then explain it. What is going on then? And Heidegger is going to carry that on with this notion of concern. Yeah, let's just, in some ways, the rest of this book is going to be an argument for why you should not think of yourself as a spirit inside of a body. And that, like, when you die, your body just goes down to the grave and your spirit goes on up into heaven. this is not to say that Heidegger thinks there is no heaven or anything like that. That's not the argument he's making. He's not like saying you have to be atheist or any of that sort of thing. But he's saying it is much more complicated than that kind of dualistic approach to being a human being. Yes?
So, what, do you think he's denying the soul to that?
It depends on what you mean by soul. So he quotes Thomas Aquinas as saying that Dasein, that soul is entities. Soul is what makes entities entities. So in that sense, we are soul. Soul is what makes existence existence.
So what would you say? So if you say a spirit doesn't go up or down, where would you say your soul goes?
Yeah, but here's where I think he's doing a flip on you here. The soul is not just the spiritual mind that you think of as inhabiting a body. The soul is the whole. That isn't, for Heidegger, you can't split yourself up into these two realms, body and spirit, or soul, right? Soul is the spirit-body complex, the whole thing. It's a complexity. And it comes together, and you don't get one part and another part, as if they were separable in any way. Like being in the world, we're going to take it apart into parts, but it's really all just one thing. So for Heidegger, you don't get a spirit or a soul that is separate from or separable from its body. And you're going to see when we talk about death, death is not the separation of the soul and the body for Heidegger. It's something much more complicated than that. And it's something that we live through. Not as in like an afterlife experience. It's just a completely different way of thinking about it, right? So I struggle with whether I want to give you some alternatives to this just to help you to understand what Heidegger is going to be driving at here. So, yeah, maybe this is just the time I'm going to talk a little bit about emergence again. Has anybody ever heard of emergence theory? Okay, so an emergence is when something comes up, right? It emerges.